Hey everyone. If you're ready for a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about success and sacrifice, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see who's joining us from around the world. The price of ambition. The sun had barely risen when Julian Sterling closed his suitcase for the last time. The morning fog covered the small town of Willow Creek like a veil of farewell. Outside, the taxi idled, its dry hum echoing down the quiet street. Inside the living room, Amelia Hayes fought the urge to scream, to beg him to stay, to hold him with her arms and her heart. But she said nothing, only watched him, her eyes filled with tears, trying to memorize every detail of the man she loved more than her own life. Julian, dressed in his leather jacket and eyes gleaming with ambition, kissed her forehead tenderly. "It's just for a while, Amy. When everything's stable, I'll come back for you. We'll live in New York. You'll see. It'll be a new life." His voice sounded confident, but her heart heard what he wasn't saying, that he might never return. She offered a broken smile and caressed his face as if it were their last touch. "You don't need New York to be someone, Julian. Everything you are is already here." He looked away. That phrase hurt him more than he expected. Deep down, he knew she was right, but the desire to conquer the world was stronger than any feeling. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. As he put his suitcase in the car's trunk, Amelia clutched the edge of her coat and took a deep breath. In the back seat, Julian rolled down the window. "I love you, Amy. Wait for me." She nodded without a word, and in that moment she knew he might never hear what she needed to say. The car pulled away slowly. Amelia stood at the entrance, feeling her heart constrict, as if an invisible hand was twisting it. The cold wind rustled the tree leaves and carried away the sound of footsteps that wouldn't return anytime soon. But fate, silent and true, began to weave paths that would change everything. The morning after Julian left, Amelia felt a strange unease. She thought it was due to nerves, the anxiety of everything that had been said, and what remained unsaid. But as the days passed, the nausea persisted, the dizziness increased, and that feminine intuition, that silent and powerful force, began to whisper certainties that she still didn't want to accept. It was a rainy Tuesday, with a broken umbrella and soaked feet, when she walked into the downtown pharmacy and bought the test. She waited until her shift ended at the cafe to take it, locked in the back bathroom. When the two clear, intense, undeniable red lines appeared, Amelia sat on the cold tile floor, hugging her legs, and cried. She cried from fear, from longing, from love, and from rage. She was alone. The next day, she went to the town's health clinic to confirm the pregnancy. Seeing the image on the ultrasound, her heart raced. "There are two," the nurse said, smiling, as if delivering good news. Amelia, however, choked on the reality. Two tiny hearts beat inside her, and neither would have their father nearby. The news spread quickly. In small towns, words fly like wind through open windows. "Pregnant and abandoned," some ladies whispered over sips of bitter coffee. Amelia listened, pretending not to. She worked until her 8th month, feeling the weight of the world on her back, and two lives growing inside her. She slept little, ate what she could, and prayed every night for strength. Leo and Max were born on a silent dawn, with fine rain tapping against the hospital window. Amelia looked at them for the first time and felt all the suffering had been worth it. They were perfect, identical. With their father's eyes, the same crooked smile Julian made when he was nervous. The love she felt for those two tiny beings was so overwhelming that for a moment, she forgot about the absence. In the first few months, loneliness was a dark room, where only the baby's cries could be heard. But little by little, she learned to bathe them with one hand, to prepare bottles in the middle of the night, to recognize each one's cry. It was exhausting, sometimes cruel, but also beautiful. And every smile from Leo and Max reminded her that life hadn't punished her. It had blessed her. She went back to work, carrying the children wrapped in blankets to the cafe. Customers got used to seeing the tired-eyed young woman with 2 babies in her arms. Some helped, others judged. But Amelia stood tall with dignity. She didn't need pity or empty advice. All she wanted was a chance to keep going. Over time, she rented a simple little house with a porch and a garden. She planted daisies at the entrance and hung photos of the twins on the walls. For each birthday, she made 2 small cakes and sang happy birthday alone. With tears in her eyes and a shy joy in her heart, Amelia didn't talk about Julian. She told the children that their dad had gone on a trip and might one day return. She didn't know if she was lying to protect them or herself. But deep down, there was still a crack of hope that she tried, unsuccessfully, to completely close. And so the years passed, between sleepless nights, school parties, frightening fevers, and hugs full of cookie crumbs. Amelia was mother and father. She was home and refuge. She was a woman marked by pain, but guided by a love that no one could take away from her. What do you think Julian sacrificed to reach the top? Do you believe he truly feels the void he talks about? Share your thoughts. New York was everything Julian Sterling had imagined, and more. Glass skyscrapers, dinners with investors, meetings in luxurious penthouses overlooking Central Park. In a short time, his name became a reference in the technology and innovation sector. At 30, he appeared on magazine covers. He was invited to exclusive events and accumulated figures most only saw in movies. He had triumphed, and the whole world applauded him. But inside, there was a silence, a constant void, as if every achievement shouted the absence of something essential. At first, he tried to silence that void with French champagne and parties in neon-lit lofts. Beautiful women, yes, many, but none with Amelia's blue eyes. None with that sweetness to understand his silences or rest their head on his chest as if the world stopped there. Sometimes, on lonely nights, Julian found himself reviewing old messages on his phone. He never had the courage to delete her number. He had written and deleted hundreds of messages over the years. How are you? I miss you. Do you still think of me? But pride and uncertainty always won, and the phone screen remained empty. During an interview for a major television network, a journalist asked him, "What did you sacrifice to get here?" Julian smiled for the camera, but his mind betrayed him. Amelia's image appeared sharply. He remembered the kiss on her forehead, her gaze that cold morning, and how he never knew if she was okay again. "The freedom to make mistakes," he replied. But what he really wanted to say was, "I sacrificed the love of my life." He bought an apartment in Manhattan that looked like a museum. Everything in its place, minimalist, sophisticated, but empty. No laughter, no smells of food, no children's clutter, no feminine voice singing out of tune in the shower. Sometimes he woke up in the middle of the night believing he heard small footsteps in the hallway. It was his mind, playing tricks on him. At an international conference in Dubai, he met a Brazilian model everyone said was perfect for him. They were together for 2 months. She wanted trips, cameras, and Julian tried to convince himself that was enough. But one rainy afternoon, looking out the hotel window, he realized he didn't even know what his child's laugh sounded like. So, he ended the relationship without explanation. His closest assistant, Robert, once commented, "You have everything, boss. Why do you seem so tired?" Julian just shrugged. How to explain that the tiredness didn't come from work, but from a lack of purpose? He was a king without a kingdom, a father without children, a rich man surrounded by devastating emotional poverty. On a rare free weekend, Julian went alone to the coast. He walked barefoot on the sand, gazing at the sea, and for the first time in a long time, he cried. The tears came out silently, almost timidly, as if they had waited years for that moment. He wasn't sure why he was crying, but he felt he had left something behind that he could never recover. And it was that night, watching the stars reflected in the sea, that he decided he needed to go back. He didn't know exactly what he would find, but something inside him screamed that a part of his story remained unwritten, and it was in Willow Creek. What do you think Julian will find when he returns to Willow Creek? Will Amelia forgive him after all these years? Leave your predictions in the comments. The call came on a gray morning when Julian was still in a meeting with Asian executives. It was Robert, his assistant, with an unusually serious voice. "Your grandfather, Mr. Arthur, passed away this morning." Julian fell silent. The news hit him like an anchor in the chest. Mr. Arthur had been more than a grandfather. He was the remaining figure from his childhood, the only one who believed he could be someone without having to lose everything along the way. 2 days later, Julian boarded a private flight to Willow Creek, wearing a black suit and a heavy heart. The jet seemed too small for the whirlwind of thoughts he carried within him. 5 years had passed since he last set foot on that land, and everything in him screamed discomfort. Nostalgia mixed with guilt, sweet memories, and memories he preferred to forget. Upon arrival, he was met with curious glances and restrained hugs. The town was still the same, cobblestone streets, the smell of freshly baked bread from the corner bakery, ladies sitting on wicker chairs on the sidewalk, commenting on other people's lives. But for Julian, everything seemed distant, as if he were watching a movie about his own life. The wake was simple, as Mr. Arthur would have wanted it. Julian stood silently in front of the coffin. He shed no tears, but his eyes were red. He remembered how his grandfather taught him to fix the old car engine, the afternoons they walked together to the square, and the last conversation they had when Mr. Arthur told him, "Don't lose sight of who you are or who you love." At the time, it seemed like a poetic phrase to Julian. Now it sounded like a prophetic warning. After the Mass, Julian went for a walk alone through the streets. He passed the school where he studied, the soccer field, the old house where he lived with his mother. Everything was the same, and at the same time, it carried a deafening absence. Turning a corner, he saw the cafe where Amelia used to work. The sign was still there, faded, but familiar. His heart skipped a beat. He stopped in front of the window, observing the subtle movement inside. A young woman waited tables, and a lady managed the cash register. But Amelia wasn't there. Disappointment came with disguised relief. Perhaps he wasn't ready to see her face to face yet. Or maybe deep down, he still hoped to run into her by chance, like in the movies. As he walked through the central square, something caught his attention. Children's laughter. He turned and saw 2 children running around a fountain. They were identical. Fair skin, wavy blonde hair, mischievous smiles. Julian froze. He felt the air escape his lungs, as if he had been punched in the chest. It was like seeing his own childhood in duplicate. He approached slowly, like someone who doesn't want to startle a dream. The children were playing with plastic cars, completely oblivious to the world. One of them let out a burst of laughter, and it was in that instant that Julian felt a chill. That laugh, that exact sound. It was the same one he heard on the old cassette tapes his mother recorded when he was little. Before he could say or do anything, A voice called the children from across the square. "Leo! Max! Let's go!" They ran towards the voice, and then he saw her. Amelia, with slightly shorter hair, but with the same sweet, firm gaze. She was carrying a shopping bag and a child's coat in each arm. She didn't see him, but he couldn't take his eyes off her. Standing there between the past and the present, Julian felt something inside him begin to crumble. The empire he had built no longer seemed so grand, because in front of those two children, and that woman, he sensed the greatest truth of his life. Perhaps he had already been a father for a long time, and simply hadn't known it. Julian stood motionless, as if his feet had rooted to the stone ground of the square. The sound of cars, the singing of birds, the conversations of people around him, everything faded into the background. Everything, except those two small figures running around the fountain. Their laughter, so free and carefree, cut through the air like living, familiar music. Every expression, every gesture of the children was a mirror of the past. They were, without a doubt, his copy. Julian's heart pounded in his chest, not from the emotion of seeing them, but from the terror of understanding what that meant. "It can't be," he murmured to himself, swallowing hard. But it could be. Deep down, he knew it from the first instant. No coincidence in the world explained those faces, those features identical to his own childhood. Julian's eyes followed the children as they approached a bench, laughing at something one of them said. They had the same way of tilting their heads when thinking, the same dimple on their left cheek, the same curious sparkle in their eyes. It was like being in front of living portraits of himself, but with the lightness he had lost long ago. His body moved by instinct, almost wanting to confirm with his hands what his eyes already knew. He took 2 steps, but stopped. What right did he have to approach? Fear, guilt, and disbelief tangled like a knot in his chest. They didn't know who he was, and maybe they were better off that way. But then one of them, the one in the green shirt, looked him straight in the eye. An intense gaze, without distrust, just curiosity. Julian felt the air escape his lungs. For a moment, it was as if that small, childlike gaze pierced through decades of distance and said, "I know you." But the moment passed, and the child turned to his brother, resuming their game. When Amelia reappeared to call them, Julian partially hid behind a tree. His heart raced. Seeing her after so many years was like a blow and a relief at the same time. She looked more mature, stronger, and more tired. But there was a serenity in the way she spoke to her children, in how she effortlessly enveloped them with love. The woman he had left behind, the woman who was now a mother, was standing there in front of him. Julian watched her from afar as she took one of the children's hands and adjusted the other's cap. And then he heard one of them say, "Mommy, why is that man looking at us like that?" She instinctively turned in the direction they pointed, and Julian, on impulse, turned his back and walked away. Fast, with clumsy steps, as if fleeing could erase what he had just seen. He sat on the nearest bench, his hands on his face, his body trembling. Memories flooded back like an avalanche. The day he left her, the broken promise, the silence between them. Everything made sense now. Amelia was pregnant, and he never knew, or worse, he never bothered to ask. Sitting there, amidst the deepest pain he had ever felt in his life, Julian understood that he had lost more than time. He had lost moments that would not return. The first steps, the first words, the midnight fevers, the spontaneous laughter, the bedtime stories. And now, all he had left was the crushing weight of regret. But there was something burning inside him, with the same intensity as the guilt. A visceral need to know them, to be part of their lives, even if it was late. Because even if he had lost the right to be a father, perhaps he was still in time to be a presence. Do you think Julian will find a way to connect with his children and Amelia? What do you believe he needs to do to earn their trust? Share your thoughts below. That night, Julian couldn't sleep. The image of the children, his children, running through the square, replayed in his mind like a movie he couldn't pause. The sound of their laughter, Amelia's sweet voice, the innocent gaze one of them cast him, all of it swirled inside him. He felt like an intruder in his own story, an outsider looking at the life he could have had. Driven by an uncontrollable restlessness, he hired a local investigator. He asked him to be discreet, to find out where Amelia lived, what she did, and above all, if there was another man in her life. He didn't know if he truly wanted to know, but he needed to. The report arrived 2 days later, and what he read disarmed him. Amelia lived in a simple neighborhood, in a small house with a porch covered in plants and toys scattered in the yard. She worked part-time at the town cafe and baked desserts on order. There was no record of a partner or frequent male visitors. 5 years alone, raising 2 children. His children, without ever having asked for anything, without ever having looked for him. Julian read that information with a knot in his throat. The attached photo of Amelia sitting on the porch with a child on each side, the 3 of them smiling as they shared a slice of cake, hit him with brutal force. It was a portrait of genuine love, of hard-won happiness, and of his absence screaming in every corner of the scene. Still heartbroken, Julian decided not to seek her out immediately. Not yet. He couldn't just show up saying, "I'm your father." That family, even without him, was a living, functional organism. He was the stranger, the one who left, the one who didn't call, the one who remained silent for 5 years. So he began to observe them. He went to the square on Saturday mornings when the children rode their bicycles. He bought sweets at the same market where Amelia did her shopping. He was careful not to be seen, but every small detail connected him even more to that reality that could and should have been his from the beginning. He discovered that Leo was the most talkative, full of questions, with curious eyes. Max, quieter, seemed to carry an entire universe within his silence. Both were incredibly smart, charismatic, with a keen sense of humor. Julian saw his own gestures in them with disconcerting clarity, not only physically, but also in their expressions, in the way they frowned when something didn't quite make sense. Amelia, for her part, was a portrait of strength. She did everything for them, raising them with firmness and affection, teaching values with simplicity and tenderness. She never complained, never played the victim. She smiled with her eyes, but there was a shadow of tiredness on her face, that kind of tiredness that accumulates year after year when you carry everything alone. Julian felt a mix of pride and shame. Pride for the incredible woman she had become. Shame for not having been by her side on each of those difficult days. It hurt him to think of the feverish nights, the birthdays without a father, the questions the children might have already asked. And yet Amelia never sent him a message, never asked for help, never looked for him. That said a lot. It was as if she had chosen silence to protect her children, and perhaps herself. And now Julian wondered, after so much time, would he still be welcome? It was a clear Sunday morning when Julian finally gathered the courage. He dressed simply, a white shirt, jeans, no expensive watches or anything that screamed the life he led elsewhere. He didn't want to appear a stranger. He wanted, if only for an instant, to be the man Amelia knew, the man she loved before everything fell apart. He waited for her at the exit of the cafe where she worked. When she walked through the door carrying a box of pastries, the world seemed to stop, just as it had in the square. But now there was no distance, no tree to hide behind. It was just him and her. Their gazes met for a second, and in that instant, Julian saw everything. The surprise, the memory, the pain. But she concealed it, like someone hiding an old wound with a practiced smile. "Amelia," he said in a low, hoarse voice. She stood still for 2 seconds before forcing a smile and replying, "Julian. Wow, it's been a long time." That artificial, almost rehearsed tone hurt him more than any insult. She didn't ask why he was there, didn't ask anything. She just offered a polite hello, as if they were casual acquaintances meeting after years. "Can we talk?" he asked. Trying to keep calm, she hesitated, looked around, and said, "Sure, I just can't stay long. I have to pick up the boys from my mom's house." Julian noticed the pause. She didn't want to give him space or time. It was as if every word was measured to maintain a barrier between them. They sat on a bench in the square, the same one where he had watched his children days earlier. She spoke with forced naturalness about work, the town, the weather. Julian tried to reach something more intimate, but she skillfully deflected. It was as if he were talking to a cafe customer and not the man who broke her heart. "I heard you have children," he ventured, testing the waters. She froze for an instant, long enough for him to notice, but she soon resumed. "Yes, 2 boys, twins." A brief, soulless smile. "They're my life." She didn't say they were his, didn't mention dates or names. It was a half-truth, and perhaps that was what hurt the most, knowing she was hiding the most important thing. "And their father?" he asked directly, without beating around the bush. Amelia looked down. "He left. We have no contact." Another half-truth, another white lie. Julian understood in that moment that she knew, that she had always known he was the father, and that she was trying to protect them. From him, from the past to the past, from everything that broke. But there was something else. In her eyes, behind the calm, controlled tone, there was pain, an ancient pain, which she held deep inside. And though she didn't say it aloud, he heard it in the silence between each sentence. "You weren't there. I did it all alone." The weight of that crushed him, but he didn't blame her. He couldn't. "Amelia," he finally said, his voice breaking, "I saw the boys. They're identical to me." She didn't respond. She just remained silent, looking at the ground. And that silence, more than any words, was the confirmation he needed, and the beginning of something neither of them knew how to repair. What do you think will be Amelia's reaction to Julian's confession? Will she let him be a part of their children's lives? Share your thoughts below. In the days following that tense conversation, Julian could barely concentrate on anything else. The image of the children, Leo and Max, as he discovered by hearing Amelia call them in the square, filled his thoughts with overwhelming force. He watched them from afar, with a mixture of fascination and pain. It was cruel to know they were his children and not be able to call them his. It was a punishment that felt too ruthless. Then, one afternoon when Amelia took them to the park to play, Julian took a chance. He waited for the children to wander off a bit, laughing among themselves as they flew colorful kites, and approached slowly. With his heart in his throat and his voice trembling, he knelt beside them and said, "Hey, those kites are flying higher than the clouds. Can I help?" The children looked at him, first with distrust, but soon with curiosity. "Do you know how to fly a kite?" Leo asked, his eyes gleaming mischievously. Julian smiled. Not only do I know how to fly it, I know how to make it reach the moon." It was enough. In minutes, they were laughing together, running across the open field, while Amelia watched them from afar, an inscrutable expression on her face. "What's your name?" Max asked, quieter, but visibly intrigued by this new friend. Julian hesitated for a second, but replied, "Alex. My name is Alex." It was a half-truth that hurt, but seemed necessary at the moment. He didn't want to scare them, didn't want to turn their world upside down without preparation. The following days became small rituals. Julian appeared at the park, at the bakery, or in front of the school, always casually. He brought balloons, toy cars, sometimes books. Little by little, the children began to look for him with their eyes. Every time they went out. "Do you think Alex will come today, Mommy?" they asked enthusiastically. Amelia, despite her apprehension, didn't stop them. Perhaps because deep down, she also felt that Julian deserved a chance, even if in silence. Julian was fascinated by every detail. Max was observant. He loved to draw and had a notebook full of colorful monsters and invented superheroes. Leo, on the other hand, was talkative, full of absurd theories about the world, and laughed at his own jokes. Together, they were a storm of life, and he felt more and more a part of it, even with a borrowed identity. One afternoon, while building a makeshift sandcastle, Leo said, "You look like my dad." Julian froze. "Oh, really?" he tried to respond, his voice as light as possible. The boy nodded. "Mommy showed us a picture of him once, but he left. If he had been as cool as you, I think he would have stayed." Max looked at his brother, serious. "But maybe one day he'll come back." Julian felt the world spinning. The sincerity of those little ones disarmed him. They talked about the absent father as if he were a fairy tale character, something distant but still occupying a place in their hearts. And he, listening to that, felt like an imposter. But also, perhaps, just perhaps, he was beginning to recover lost time. At the end of that day, when Amelia came to pick them up, Julian approached and asked with a humble gaze, "Can I keep seeing them like this, as a friend?" He looked at her eyes for a long moment. She didn't respond with words. She just nodded, her eyes filled with tears, and turned to walk with her children. It was the first step of a bridge made of broken pieces, hope, and unlived memories. Little by little, the stranger named Alex began to become part of the twins' routine. It was as if he had always been there, between a laugh in the square, a push on the swing, an ice cream shared at sunset. Julian adapted to the role of a friend, with a naturalness that surprised even himself. And to his even greater surprise, Amelia began to allow him to approach more freely. One day, she invited him to dinner. It was an ordinary Friday. Amelia's house was modest, but cozy. Julian noticed the details she had lovingly chosen. Flowered curtains, handmade. Drawings by the children themselves. The aroma of homemade food filling the air. The dinner was rice, stewed chicken, and mashed potatoes. Nothing gourmet, nothing like what he was used to in New York. But it was the tastiest food he had tasted in years. The children talked non-stop, taking turns telling stories about school, about friends, about the games they invented. Julian listened to them with a father's attention, though they didn't know it, and with a smile that escaped him effortlessly. Max showed a new drawing. "It's you, Alex, and us. We're flying in a giant balloon." Julian felt his eyes fill with tears. "That's incredible," he said, trying to not choke on his emotions. Amelia, sitting at the table with her hair pulled back in a loose bun, watched everything in silence. Her eyes went from her children to Julian, as if trying to understand if the man sitting there was the same one who had left her years ago. There was something new in him, something calmer, more present. But she still carried the wounds and the memories of nights spent crying in silence so as not to wake the babies. "Do you like living in the big city?" she asked suddenly, breaking the magical moment. Julian took a deep breath. "I like it, but lately I feel like something is missing." She nodded without saying more. They didn't need to name what they both knew: the absence, the past, the life that almost was. After dinner, the children insisted that Julian stay a little longer. "They wanted him to watch a superhero movie with us, Alex." He accepted, sitting between the two on the sofa. It was a small, cramped space, but he felt more comfortable there than in any luxury penthouse. Leo rested his head on his shoulder. Max took his hand, without realizing it. And Julian felt something inside him settle, as if that was where he was always supposed to be. When the children fell asleep, Amelia took them to their room. Julian remained in the living room, looking around. Every corner of the house told a story. The faded curtain, the stacked toys, the drawings taped to the kitchen wall. It was a simple life, yes, but it was real, and it was permeated with love. She returned to the living room, sitting on the armchair opposite him. "They adore you," she said softly. "They think you're special." Julian smiled, but didn't respond. He knew that sooner or later, he would have to tell the truth. But a part of him feared that, by doing so, he would break that silent magic that was beginning to blossom. That night, leaving the house and walking through the quiet streets, Julian realized that he had rediscovered much more than his children. He had rediscovered a version of himself he thought was lost. That house, that table, those laughs, they weren't just memories. They were beginning to become a home and a dream. He was Nolan. Do you think Julian is ready to tell his children the truth? What challenges do you foresee for Julian and Amelia as they navigate this revelation? Share your thoughts below. The days became a pendulum of contradictory emotions for Amelia. Julian's constant presence, now Alex to the children, caused her an unsettling mix of comfort and insecurity. She watched him with his children, the naturalness with which he laughed with them, his patience in explaining simple things, the way he hugged them with a care that bordered on the sacred. It was impossible not to feel that something true was being born there, or perhaps reborn. But at the same time, there was the past, and it hurt. It hurt most on days when the children asked why their dad never came back, why all their other classmates had someone to bring to Father's Day, and they didn't. Amelia had spent years trying to heal that absence with multiplied love. Now, with Julian so close, the wound throbbed more intensely. Many times she wondered if she was being selfish. Was it right to let them get attached to him again, without knowing who he really was? What if he hurt them? What if one day he left again, and this time not only her, but taking with him the two most fragile hearts she knew? Julian, for his part, began to dream. For the first time in a long time, he imagined a future that had nothing to do with numbers or deals. He found himself visualizing lazy Sundays on the couch with the children, breakfasts with Amelia, a dog mug, running in the yard. Simple, everyday fantasies that made him smile without realizing it. One rainy afternoon, while the children were at their grandmother's house, Julian stayed to help Amelia with some pastry orders. They baked in silence for a while, until she said, "Did you know they were born on a night like this? It rained so much. I thought I wasn't going to make it to the hospital." He stopped stirring the syrup. "You were alone?" She nodded. "My aunt took me, but yes, I was alone." That confession hurt him deeply. He wanted to apologize, to kneel, to beg forgiveness for every absence. But she didn't ask for that. She kept stirring the syrup, as if talking about the weather, and it was then that he understood. She no longer wanted promises or tears. She wanted stability. She wanted security for her children. And maybe, just maybe, she also wanted to feel loved again, but without risks. That night, saying goodbye on the porch, it was still raining softly. Julian hesitated before leaving. "Amelia, I never stopped loving you. Not a single day." She looked at him for an instant that was too long. She wanted to respond, but bit her lips. She only said, "They love you, and that scares me more than anything else." He understood. Love was no longer just between the two of them. It was a delicate triangle, where any mistake could hurt innocent hearts. Amelia carried within her the fierce instinct of a mother who had survived alone, protecting her children from disappointments, even her own. But even in the midst of conflict, there was a subtle hope growing. In the small gestures, in the long conversations, in the shared silences, they were reconnecting not as the young lovers they once were, but as two adults marked by life, trying to weave a future where, finally, the wounds could heal. The doubt was no longer a doubt. Julian knew it. Every glance, every gesture of the children was like a reflection of himself. But still, something inside him needed final confirmation. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps it was the need to cling to a piece of paper, a cold number that validated what his heart was already screaming loudly. Leo and Max were his children, and he loved them more than any success he had achieved in his life. He did it discreetly. One ordinary afternoon, while Amelia was attending to a customer at the cafe, he took a used straw and a bottle cap from one of the children, carefully putting them in an envelope. It was a gesture that pained him, as if he were violating something sacred. But Julian didn't want, couldn't, make a mistake with them again. Days later, the result arrived in a white, discreet envelope with small, impersonal letters. Genetic compatibility, 99.99%. He read the phrase 3 times, each time with more difficulty. His hands trembled, his eyes burned. There it was, in black and white, what his heart already knew. He was a father. Julian sat on a park bench, with the envelope clutched in his fingers. He looked at the sky, took a deep breath, and let the tears flow. It wasn't sadness. It was a relief so intense that it mingled with pain, with guilt, with hope. He thought about all the nights he had missed, the first steps, the falls, the night fears, and now he had 2 sons. 2 sons who still called him Alex. He wanted to run to Amelia's house. He wanted to shout the truth, to take the children in his arms, to tell them everything. But immediately, fear paralyzed him. What if she didn't forgive him? What if he broke that fragile bond they were rebuilding? What if she told him he had already lost his chance to be a father? That now it was too late? That night, seeing them asleep on the sofa after another afternoon together, Julian covered them tenderly. He observed their serene faces, their chests rising and falling in a calm rhythm. He felt a desperate urge to kiss their foreheads, to whisper, "My son, my son." But he held back. It wasn't time yet. The next day, he tried to act normally. He took them to school. He laughed at silly jokes. He helped Leo with a puzzle while Max showed him his new drawings. Amelia, for her part, looked at him with growing distrust. She saw something in his eyes she couldn't name, a different sparkle, a contained emotion. Julian found himself staring too much, smiling too much, getting emotional over trifles. When the children gave him drawings with "Alex is cool" written in crooked letters, he almost broke down right there. And it was at that moment that he understood. The truth was not a weapon. It was their right, the right of those 2 little hearts that deserved to know who he really was. But how to say it? How to break the silence of 5 years? How to look Amelia in the eye and admit it had taken him all the time to seek the truth? He didn't know, but he knew he couldn't wait forever. Because time, the same time that took her, what do you think Julian will do with the DNA results? How will he finally reveal the truth to Amelia and the boys? Share your strategies in the comments. The night was warm, suffocating. Julian walked through the silent streets of Willow Creek, trying to find air amidst the whirlwind of feelings consuming him. In his hand, the envelope with the DNA test was already crumpled. In his pocket, an old photo of him and Amelia in front of the town square fountain, taken on an ordinary day, a day before everything changed. He had always carried it with him, hidden among papers he never had the courage to throw away. That night when he left, it came back to him with painful clarity. He remembered the sound of the suitcase closing, Amelia's soft perfume, the heavy silence between them. He remembered how he avoided looking at her when she, with tears in her eyes, told him, "It's not too late to stay." And he, believing he was doing the right thing, only kissed her forehead and promised to return. An empty promise, a cowardly gesture. Now, looking back, he saw the truth clearly. He had been selfish, arrogant. He thought love would wait forever, that people wouldn't change while he conquered the world. He didn't think about the pain he left behind. He didn't imagine that Amelia was carrying 2 lives inside her. He left her alone, pregnant, helpless. He also remembered his first night in New York, alone in a 5-star hotel room, toasting with strangers to a new contract. But inside, he felt an inexplicable emptiness. He thought it was fleeting nostalgia, believed he was on the right path. But now he understood that, at that very moment, Amelia might have been scared. She was in labor, calling out for someone who never came. Julian sat on the park bench, where she had hugged him for the last time. He ran his hand through his hair, his face hidden in his hands. The shame was almost unbearable. He had become a man admired by many. But what about her? What about his children? What kind of man abandons the woman he loves at the most fragile moment of her life? It was hard to accept that the pain she carried bore his signature. And the cruelest part of all was realizing that she never hated him. She never sought revenge. She just kept going. She fought. She raised her children with dignity, hiding the burden of an absent father. And even so, she allowed him to approach. She trusted him once more. Mr. Arthur's words, his grandfather's, echoed in his mind. Don't lose sight of who you are or who you love. Julian now knew he had lost himself, in ambition, in forgiveness, in pride and fear. And most of all, he had lost her. Guilt weighed heavily. But there was a spark of hope, because now he wasn't running away. He was there, back, facing the ghosts he himself created, but ready to face them. He knew he couldn't erase the past, but perhaps he could rewrite the future. And that new story had to begin with a gesture, a plea for forgiveness, not with words, but with actions, with deeds that would say more than any promise, for her, for Leo, for Max, and for the Julian she once loved, who was now, finally, beginning to be reborn. The night fell, heavy with humid, suffocating heat. The sky was dark, as if the world was about to collapse. Amelia, accustomed to the signs from her children's bodies, realized something was wrong as soon as she touched Max's forehead. He was hot, too hot. He trembled, huddled on the sofa with his eyes half closed and his face pale. Leo, frightened, squeezed her hand in silence. Without thinking twice, Amelia grabbed the thermometer. 4 degrees. Her heart skipped a beat. She tried to bring down the fever with wet cloths, with syrup, but nothing seemed to work. Max murmured nonsensical things, his gaze lost. Leo began to cry, and she did too. The situation reminded her of other nights, when she was alone with the 2 crying babies, fighting against fear and exhaustion. But now she was no longer alone. Without pride, without hesitation, Amelia called Julian. "Alex, please, come. It's Max." Her voice trembled. On the other end of the line, Julian didn't ask anything. He just replied, "I'm coming." He arrived in less than 15 minutes, his face pale, breathless. He found Amelia on her knees on the living room floor, Max in her arms, and Leo clinging to her leg. The sight broke his soul. Without saying a word, he knelt beside her and took Max in his arms. "Hey, champ, Alex is here," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, though his hands trembled. They took Max to the hospital. Julian drove like a madman, and Amelia held the child in the back seat, whispering promises and prayers. Leo stayed with the neighbor. In the emergency room, doctors performed tests, administered antipyretics, and began hydration. The fever slowly began to drop. It was a long night of waiting, of anguish, of silences filled with unsaid words. When Max finally fell asleep peacefully, connected to an IV, Julian left the room and went to the hallway, where Amelia was sitting, exhausted. Her eyes were red and her hands clasped as if still praying. He sat beside her. For several minutes, they said nothing. They just breathed together that same dense air, heavy with fear and memories. And then Amelia spoke, softly, without anger. Just pain. "You are their father, Julian." He remained silent. A part of him expected it. The other part still broke inside upon hearing the truth spoken aloud. "I knew it from the beginning," she continued. "From the moment I saw you in the square, but I didn't want you to come back just because you felt guilty." Julian covered his face with his hands. He cried. He cried as he had never cried in his life. For everything he lost, for everything she lived through, for all the nights he wasn't there. "I failed them. I should have come back. I should have looked for them. I promised you I would return." His voice was barely a broken thread. Amelia looked at him. "You didn't come back, but now you're here, and I don't know what to do with that." It wasn't a reproach. It was a release. And in that instant, Julian understood that forgiveness wasn't a magic word. It was a path, one he would have to walk step by step, with humility, with truth, and with all the love that now overflowed from his chest. That morning, while Max slept under the care of the medical team, Julian and Amelia, sitting side by side, took the first real step towards the truth. And for the first time, she didn't call him Alex. She whispered, "Thank you for being here, Julian." Call to action. What do you think Max will accept Julian as his father? How will their family dynamic change after this truth is revealed? Share your thoughts below. The revelation from Amelia hung in the air like a suspended truth, about to fall on everyone. After Max was discharged and returned home, the following days were strange. Julian was still present, but something had changed. He knew it. Amelia knew it. Only the children continued to live in the limbo of innocence, and Julian felt that was unfair. They had a right to know, to understand who he really was. It was Amelia who made the decision. They were sitting at the table on an ordinary afternoon when she called Leo and Max with an unusual seriousness. The children, always attentive to their mother's tone, sat with restless, wide eyes. Julian was by her side, with his hands cold, his heart beating so hard it seemed to pound in the room. Children, Amelia began, her voice soft but firm. You know that Alex has been very special to our family. He has taken care of you, played with you, loved you. She looked at Julian, who nodded, his face composed. But there's something you need to know. Something very important. The twins looked at each other, confused. It was Max who asked, "Is he leaving?" The question broke Julian's heart. "No, my love," Amelia replied with a fragile smile. "Actually, Alex has another name, and he's more than a friend. He is your father." The silence was deafening. Both boys remained still, processing the words. Leo was the first to react. His eyes widened, and a smile began to form. "You're my dad?" he asked with a mixture of surprise and joy. Julian felt tears escape his eyes. "Yes, Leo, I am." Leo jumped into his arms with a force that almost made him lose his balance. The boy hugged him tightly, his face buried in his chest. "I knew it. I knew you were different. I always felt it." Julian held him close as if he never wanted to let go. It was as if, in that embrace, a lifetime of absence began to heal. But Max remained silent. He looked at the two of them, his eyes filled with tears, but he wasn't smiling. "You lied to us?" he asked in a low voice, without looking at Julian. The father tried to approach. "Son, I didn't want to. I was scared. I didn't want to frighten you." But Max backed away. "You weren't there when we were born, not when I got sick, and now you want to be a dad just because it's easy?" Those words cut Julian more than anything else. It was true. Max's pain wasn't pure anger. It was fear, disappointment, confusion. Amelia tried to intervene, but Julian raised his hand in a calm gesture. "He's right," he said, his eyes filled with tears. "I wasn't there, and I can't erase that, but I want to be here now. Every day. If you let me." Max ran out of the room, his eyes wet. Amelia went after him, leaving Julian with Leo still in his arms. The happiness of one clashed with the pain of the other, and the father at the center of it all felt divided, torn between two hearts he wished to protect. That night, Julian understood that being a father went beyond blood, beyond biology, beyond easy hugs. Being a father would mean winning Max over patiently, day after day. Being a father would mean proving with actions that this promise would not be broken now. And he was willing to do anything, anything to rebuild the love that, though wounded, still beat within that family. Call to action. What do you think Julian will do to win Max's trust? How will their family face the challenges of healing and rebuilding? Share your thoughts below. 2 days after the revelation to the children, Julian received an unexpected call. It was Samuel Whitaker, his partner and right-hand man at the company they had built together. The man's voice, always energetic, now sounded urgent. "We have a multi-million-dollar deal in our hands, Julian. An Asian conglomerate wants to buy part of our technology, but they want you in New York in 48 hours for the signing. Otherwise, the deal falls through." The world seemed to wobble for an instant. Julian was sitting on the porch of Amelia's house with a glass of warm coffee in his hands and Leo playing with a toy car at his feet. It was a simple scene, but filled with peace. And now that peace was being threatened by a past that insisted on pulling him back. He hung up the phone without giving an answer. His mind was spinning in circles. The proposal was tempting. Astronomical figures, global prestige, international expansion. It was the kind of deal that changes the game, that elevates any executive to the pantheon of economic immortals. But for the first time, he wasn't sure if that still mattered to him. That night, he walked alone to the lake, the same place where, as a young man, he had promised himself he would never be just another face in the crowd. Now he found himself wishing for exactly that. A common life, with simple dinners, lazy Sundays, and hugs before bedtime. He looked at his reflection in the water and wondered who that man was. The ambitious Julian who had conquered everything, or the new father who was just beginning to understand what true love was. When he told Amelia about the proposal, she remained silent. For a moment, he thought she would react with anger or coldness, but she only sighed. "I knew this moment was coming," she said. "You belong to another world, Julian." She paused. "I didn't know it was going to hurt so much to see you leave again." "I don't want to leave," he replied immediately, with a sincerity that surprised him. "But if I don't go, I lose everything I built." She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "And if you go, you lose everything you've started to rebuild here." Meanwhile, Max, who was still distant, overheard the conversation from behind the door. The idea of losing his dad again, just when he was beginning to accept his presence, filled his small heart with fear. He said nothing that night, but the look he gave Julian the next morning at breakfast was different. There was no longer anger. There was a silent plea. "Stay, Dad." Julian had 4 to 8 hours to decide between two worlds. On one side, the empire he built with blood and sweat. On the other, a family he was just beginning to know, but who already inhabited every beat of his heart. Time was his enemy. Again. But now, for the first time, he had something bigger than numbers asking him to stay. Love. And in the midst of that whirlwind of decisions and uncertainties, one thing was clear. Whatever his decision, it would change everything. Forever. Julian asked for a day, 24 hours to decide between the weight of a lifetime of conquests and the soft, still fragile whisper of a love that was finally beginning to take shape. His partner grumbled. He tried to convince him with figures, promises, veiled threats about shareholders. But Julian, for the first time, did not yield to the logic of business. He asked for silence. He needed to listen to his heart, and it had been a long time since he had done so. The night arrived, silent and full of thoughts. Amelia left him alone with the children, as a wordless vote of confidence. He prepared simple sandwiches and orange juice, and the three of them had dinner on the living room floor, surrounded by toys and timid laughter. Leo was full of excitement. He wanted to know everything about New York, planes, business. Max, quieter, watched him with attentive eyes, as if trying to decipher his intentions. After dinner, Julian brought a wooden box. Inside, old photos of him as a child, of him with Mr. Arthur, of him with his mother. One in particular made Leo excited, a photo where Julian, at 7 years old, made the same silly face Leo loved to make. "He's just like me," the boy said, pointing and laughing. Julian just smiled, but inside he cried. Max slowly approached and picked up a photo of teenage Julian in front of the same fountain where he and his brother used to play. "You played there too?" he asked him. "Yes, a lot. This town was always my home, even when I thought I wanted to run away from it." Max nodded. After a while, he whispered, "You're leaving, aren't you?" Julian swallowed hard. "I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what's most important." Then, something unexpected happened. Max stood up, grabbed a colored pencil and a sheet of paper, and drew 3 little stick figures holding hands. "This is me, this is Leo, and this is you." Julian took the drawing with trembling hands. "You want me to stay?" he asked, his voice breaking. Max shrugged, but then replied, "Mom never smiles the same way when you're not around." Julian left the living room for a moment and went to Amelia's bedroom. She was sitting on the bed with a book in her hands, but she wasn't reading. "They love you," he said. "I do too, and I don't know how to do this without breaking anyone." Amelia closed the book calmly. I just want you to choose with your heart, for the first time in your life. On the terrace, with the night enveloping everything in a veil of silence, Julian looked up at the sky. He thought of all he had conquered, every applause, every check, every headline. And then he looked into the house. He saw Max and Leo asleep on the sofa, huddled together. Amelia in the background turning off the lights. And he thought, what is an empire if there's no one to share it with? That night, lying on the makeshift mattress in the living room, Julian didn't sleep. He lay there, watching his sons breathe, listening to the wind tapping against the windows, feeling the time slip through his fingers. It was the last breath of an old life, and perhaps, if he had the courage, the first step towards a new one. The clock read 9:47 a.m. when Samuel, Julian's partner, looked for the last time towards the boarding gate. The flight to New York departed in 13 minutes, and Julian still hadn't appeared. The security guards, the driver, and even the representative of the Asian conglomerate exchanged impatient glances. "He's not coming," Samuel finally said, throwing his phone onto the lounge chair. "The idiot chose love." Across the city, far from the cold bustle of the airport, Julian walked through the municipal market of Willow Creek with a bag of bread and fresh fruit. He wore simple jeans, a white t-shirt, and worn sneakers. And he smiled as he hadn't smiled in years. He had made his decision. For the first time. Not out of pride, not out of ambition, but out of love. A love that now had a name, a face, and children's laughter. Upon arriving at the house of Amelia, he found the children playing in the yard. "Didn't you go on a trip?" Leo asked, confused. Julian knelt down and looked him in the eyes. "No, and I'm not leaving." Max stopped playing and approached. "Why?" Julian looked at both of them with firmness and tenderness. "Because my place is here, with you." Amelia came out the door, surprised to see him so early. "Did you miss your flight?" Julian walked towards her, stopped in front of her, and took her hands. "I didn't miss it. I chose not to get on. I chose to stay, not out of guilt, not out of fear, but because there's no other place in the world where I want to be. And if that means starting from scratch, selling everything, learning to live differently, I'll do it for you." She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "For the first time in my life, yes." Amelia hugged him. A strong, deep hug, with the weight of 5 years of silence and longing. It was like closing a chapter, or perhaps opening a new one. In the days that followed, Julian began to dismantle his old life. He asked Samuel to take over the company. He sold shares. He delegated tasks. He said he wasn't abandoning what he built, but now he was building something bigger. A home, he explained. A real one. The press tried to understand. Blogs speculated, but he didn't give public explanations. He didn't need to. Little by little, he reintegrated himself into the town. He opened a small business with Amelia, an artisanal bakery where Leo and Max sold cookies on weekends. He learned to wake up early, to take the children to school, to burn the rice occasionally. He laughed at the mess. He cleaned up mistakes. He cried with emotion when the children called him Dad aloud, with no more secrets. There were difficult days. Of course, he knew that. The transition wasn't perfect. Sometimes Julian felt the weight of what he had left behind. But when he saw Amelia laughing with the children at the table, or Max lying on his lap, reading stories, the world seemed in order. It was another kind of success, quieter, more intimate, but infinitely more valuable. And so, between warm breads, kisses on the forehead, and school mornings, Julian discovered what it truly meant to have it all. It wasn't a penthouse in Manhattan, nor multi-million-dollar contracts. It was waking up every day with the certainty of being exactly where he was supposed to be. And that sometimes, to win life, you first have to lose the fear of starting over. Call to action. What do you think is the most important lesson Julian learned on his journey? How would you describe the new beginning he found? Share your thoughts below. The weather in town was different that Sunday morning. A modest stage had been set up in Willow Creek Central Square, surrounded by flowers and benches occupied by curious neighbors. Simple banners announced the launch of a new foundation, dedicated to supporting single mothers and local entrepreneurs. There were fresh fruits, artisanal breads, and colorful drawings hanging, some made by Leo and Max, proudly displayed. Julian, wearing a rolled-up dress shirt and no bodyguards around, walked onto the stage with a microphone in his hand and his heart in his hands. He looked at the audience. Among unknown faces, he found Amelia's steady gaze. She was sitting in the front row with the children beside her. She didn't smile, but the sparkle in her eyes told him she knew this moment was more than a speech. It was a plea for forgiveness. For many years, he began, his voice thick with emotion, I chased numbers, titles, recognition. And in that race, I left behind something far more valuable than any fortune. I left behind a brave, generous woman and 2 incredible children whom I'm only now truly getting to know. His voice broke for a second, but he continued. Today, I want to say something I should have said 5 years ago. Amelia, forgive me. The square fell silent. Some people looked at each other. Others lowered their gaze. Amelia remained still. Julian took a deep breath. You raised our children with a strength I can only admire, and even when I returned, I brought more pain than comfort. But still, you allowed me to stay. You gave me the opportunity to try, and for that, today I honor you. He extended his hand, and a collaborator brought an envelope. I sold part of my company in New York. With that, we created the Amelia's Light Foundation, dedicated to supporting women who, like you, do the impossible every day. With this foundation, he continued, I want to make sure no mother in this town has to choose between raising her children with dignity or giving up her own dreams. The applause came slowly, timidly, until it became a sea of emotional clapping. Amelia had her hands clasped in her lap. Max rested his head on her shoulder. Leo jumped with joy. She finally smiled, a small, tired smile, but full of meaning. After the event, Julian stepped down from the stage and walked towards her. He stopped in front of her in silence. Amelia slowly stood up. You didn't have to do this, she said, her voice trembling. But I needed to, he replied, his eyes filled with tears. Because loving is also about repairing, and if possible, starting over with truth. She didn't respond immediately. She just hugged him. A full, deep embrace with the weight of pain and the lightness of forgiveness. And in that embrace, the past was finally released. The town talked about that gesture for weeks, not because of its economic value, but because of the courage of a man who chose the harder path, recognizing his mistakes and publicly redeeming himself. The foundation grew, helping dozens of women, and most importantly, sealed Julian's commitment to the place that was now, truly, his home. Time, with its silent patience, began to weave a new routine for Julian and Amelia. It wasn't immediate, nor perfect. Rebuilding trust is like hand-sewing torn fabric. It demands delicacy, constancy, and the acceptance that some marks will always remain visible. But love, that more mature and profound love, was the thread that united every gesture. Julian became a constant presence at breakfast. He learned to make pancakes, although Max always said moms were better. He carried the children to school, helped with household chores, and even ventured to sell artisanal bread at the town fair, at the bakery he had opened with Amelia. The townspeople, once skeptical, began to smile as they saw him pass. He was no longer the distant executive. He was Julian, the twins' dad. Leo was always the most expressive, the first to call him Alec's dad, mixing the names with a child's typical naturalness. Julian laughed, moved each time. Max, on the other hand, still called him only by his name. He was respectful, even affectionate, but there was an invisible barrier he still kept between them, and Julian didn't force it. He waited, because he understood that true love also knows how to wait. Amelia and Julian, little by little, rediscovered each other's company. They started with long talks on the terrace. Then came walks through the market, Sunday lunches with music in the background. She laughed more, he slept better. They didn't need to tell each other they loved each other. It was implicit in every prolonged gaze, in every silent gesture, in every time he took her hand for no reason. Then, one ordinary night, with the scent of rain and a starry sky, the unexpected happened. Julian was returning from school with the children. They had passed through the park, bought sweets, and laughed about something silly. Back home, Max took his drawing notebook and showed a new illustration. It was him, Leo, and Julian, all wearing superhero capes. "This is Dad," he said, pointing to the central figure with a D on his chest. Julian froze. He looked at Amelia, who watched the scene with tears in her eyes. "You called me Dad?" he asked, trying to control his emotion. Max nodded with the serenity of someone who has made a big decision. "You weren't at first, but you are now." Julian carefully hugged him, as if holding the world in his arms. Leo joined immediately, and the three of them stood there, hugging in the middle of the living room. Amelia watched, a tear rolling down her cheek. It wasn't sadness. It was relief. It was the confirmation that, against all odds, love had found its way back. That night, the house seemed to breathe differently, as if every corner, every crack, smiled in unison. It was a new family, made of patches, second chances, and real feelings. There was no luxury, but there was presence. There was no perfection, but there was truth. And in that instant, Julian knew with total certainty. He was not just a father. He was home. The sky over Willow Creek dawned clear, with a gentle breeze that caressed the freshly opened flowers in the central square garden. It was the first day of spring, as if even nature had decided to celebrate a new beginning. The benches were adorned with white ribbons and bouquets of daisies, while an arch of pink and lilac flowers surrounded the makeshift altar. And there, under that cloudless blue sky, Amelia and Julian were about to seal, before everyone, what time had failed to erase: love. The guests settled into an emotional silence. There were the ladies from the cafe, lifelong neighbors, children from the school, mothers supported by the foundation that now bore Amelia's name. No one could hide the emotion of seeing that story, marked by pain and overcoming, culminate in such a simple yet grand moment. Julian, wearing a light gray suit, waited beside the officiant, with sweaty hands and a pounding heart. He looked at the garden and remembered every step to that moment: the ambitious young man who left, the empty man who returned, and the father who finally found himself. He knew none of that would have been possible without her strength. Amelia was his spring after the longest winter of his life. In the distance, soft music began to play, and then the twins appeared. Leo, as cheerful as ever, came skipping among the petals scattered on the ground. Max, more serious, carried the ring pillow as if it were a treasure. Both wore small gray suits that made them look even more like their dad. Upon reaching the altar, Julian's eyes filled with tears. They smiled proudly as if to say, "You made it, Dad, and so did we." Amelia appeared shortly after in a simple white dress, her hair loose, and a crown of natural flowers. There was no luxury or ostentation, but there was beauty, a serene beauty that comes from the soul. She walked slowly, her gaze fixed on Julian's, as if the world around them had disappeared. As they met, he whispered, "You are my miracle." She, smiling, replied, "You are my choice." The officiant's words were barely heard. The glances between them, the shared smiles, their intertwined fingers, all spoke for themselves. When it was time for the vows, Julian took a deep breath and said, "I don't promise perfection, but I promise presence every day. In the good times and in the difficult ones, I promise to love not only you, but every step of our children, because now we are one." Amelia, her voice breaking, replied, "I promise to forgive you every time the past tries to scare us, and to love you every time the present reminds us that it was worth fighting for. You came back, and now I know we will never be alone again." When they exchanged rings and the kiss sealed the union, the entire square stood to applaud. There were tears on almost every face, even on the old baker's, who was almost never moved. The children ran to hug them, and the image of that united quartet under a flowered sky remained in everyone's hearts. After the ceremony, a simple banquet was served. The children ran through the garden, the adults danced with flowers in their hair, and Julian, with Max in his arms, and Leo clinging to his arm, laughed as he hadn't laughed in a long time. Amelia watched him from afar with a calm smile. She knew that now everything was real, that after all, they had triumphed. Spring arrived not only on the calendar, but in their hearts. And in that small town, where love survived time, silence, and broken promises, life flourished again as only it does when watered with truth. What was your favorite moment in Julian and Amelia's journey? Rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments, and let us know what made it special for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more unforgettable stories.